Mark Lane's new book is Plausible Denial. Back to your phone call, San Francisco. Hello.
Mr. Lane, following the Bay of Pigs invasion, Kennedy exclaimed that he wanted to shatter the CIA into 1,000,000 pieces. Had the Bay of Pigs succeeded and they had gotten Cuba back, would the CIA have nixed its plans to shoot Kennedy, or would they have still gone through with it?
Well, it's hard to know what would have happened, but you're quite right. I think he said 1,000 pieces and scattered the pieces to the winds. That was quoted in the New York Times under a sub-headline called Kennedy Bitterness. Kennedy had fired Allen Dulles. He said he was going to destroy the CIA. He had already become involved in rapprochement with Fidel Castro. A representative was meeting with Castro at the time that Kennedy was assassinated. He also had said that he was going to withdraw all of the troops and all Americans from Vietnam, and that meant the CIA, who had preceded the Green Berets. In September of 1963, he withdrew 1,000 advisors, as they were then called. In November, another 1,000. He said they would all be out by the end of the next year, and he was going to place his brother Robert in charge of a new intelligence organization. We have books written by officers of the CIA at that time who said the headquarters was a tomb. They knew they were finished. And they were talking about a Kennedy dynasty. John reelected in 1964, Bobby running in 1968, and maybe again in 1972. A Kennedy dynasty, and the CIA was finished. Well, a few shots were fired in Dallas, and it was the end of the Kennedy dynasty. Yeah. The CIA was not only finished, but now, for the first time in the history of America, the former director of the CIA is the President of the United States.
Logan, West Virginia, from Mark Lane.
He just answered my question as to why. Thank you anyway.
Okay, I thank you. New York City, hello.
Yes. Why has everybody been so reluctant to state the obvious? The night before the assassination, Lee Oswald, Jack Ruby, and J.D. Tippett were all at the LBJ Ranch working out the arrangement.
No one ever said. That's crazy. Pensacola, Florida, hello.
Hey, I called just to give you a very hearty thumbs up for refusing to participate in this awful trend of intentionally trying to combine fact with fiction and recounting history. Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you. Baltimore from Mark Lane. Hello.
Recounting history. Congratulations.
Hello, Baltimore. Turn your radio down. Baltimore? I'm sorry, you got to turn your radio down. Ann Arbor, Michigan. Hello.
Hi, Larry. Mark, I have two questions. Why would Earl Warren be concerned about a nuclear war if the CIA was the organization that killed Kennedy? And also, you alluded to George Bush. Was he in the CIA back then, and exactly what might have his involvement been?
All right, well, we'll start with Bush. That's an easy question and an easy answer. Bush, of course, when he became director of the CIA in the mid-1970s, said he had never been associated with the CIA. Under the Freedom of Information Act, I have a document which is a memorandum signed, written by J. Edgar Hoover, subject to assassination of President Kennedy, which starts by stating, and it's dated November 29th, 1963, 1 week to the day after the president was killed, and it says that some anti-Castro Cubans in the Miami area might become engaged in unauthorized actions against Cuba after the assassination of President Kennedy, and it talks about that, and then it goes on to conclude, the substance of the foregoing information was orally furnished to Mr. George Bush of the Central Intelligence Agency and Captain William Edwards of the Defense Intelligence Agency on November 23rd, 1963, by Mr. W.T. Forsyth of this bureau being the FBI. Copies were sent to the Director, Central Intelligence Agency, attention, Deputy Director Plans. The Deputy Director of Plans was in charge of what is known as the Dirty Tricks Department, assassinations overseas, devaluation of currency, overthrowing governments. And there is reference here to George Bush, Mr. George Bush of the Central Intelligence Agency, and this is about a briefing which he received, according to Mr. Hoover, the day after the assassination.
George Bush was with the CIA in 1963?
He denies this. He at first.
What was he doing in the CIA in 63?
Well, he denies it.
He was in Congress, wasn't he?
Well, this is what he says. He says that
he wasn't. Why would Kennedy? Bush didn't even know Kennedy.
Well,
why would Kennedy have had Bush in the CIA?
Well, I mean, he could be at any low level. I mean, it's not up to the president.
I thought he was in Congress from Texas.
Well, let me just say what he says. This was published in The Nation magazine by Joe McBride, and they called Bush, who was then vice president, and he was ambiguous at first, his office. Then he denied it. Then the CIA issued a statement saying that George Bush in this memorandum was not George Herbert Walker Bush, but George William Bush.
Oh.
Well, Joe McBride of The Nation was relentless. He tracked down George William Bush in the Washington area, who was working for the Social Security Administration. He said for 6 months in that time frame, he had worked for the CIA, but he was a low-level file clerk, and he certainly had never been present at an interagency briefing of any kind, and he had never been briefed about the Kennedy assassination. He said it must be the other George Bush. But the other George Bush, George Herbert Walker Bush, did do something which seems quite bizarre. He formed a company with Hugh Leitke back in Midland, Texas, called Zapata Petroleum. That was Bush's favorite name, Zapata. And then when that hit 72 oil wells in a row, Bush sold his interest, moved to Houston, married Barbara, and formed a new company called Zapata Offshore Petroleum, and they had helicopter pads all over Latin America. The top-secret code name for the Bay of Pigs invasion, known only then to the Joint Chiefs and a few others, was Operation Zapata. And Fletcher Prouty, who wrote the introduction to my book, Plausible Denial, was the man who was in charge of liaison with the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and he provided all of the weapons of war for the CIA when they were engaged in warfare. He was ordered to get, I can finish in a second, he was ordered to get 2 ships to invade Cuba. He got 2 naval ships from the Chesapeake Naval Facility, brought them down to Elizabethville, North Carolina. The naval colors were painted off, and for Operation Zapata, the new names were painted on Barbara and Houston, and those were the only 2 ships under Operation Zapata which invaded Cuba at the Bay of Pigs.
Lake Elsinore, California. Hello.
Gentlemen, I have 2 brief, unrelated questions, and I'll hang up and listen to the answers. I'm still not clear as to exactly what Oswald's role was. What was he doing why was there a struggle in the theater? Was he just a guy watching a movie? Or what exactly was his role? And David Scheim, in your book Contract on America, propounds the theory that Kennedy was assassinated by Traficante, Roselli, and Marcello, and all those famous mafia greats because of Robert Kennedy's continual investigation of the mafia. And Traficante is quoted as saying, "If you cut off the dog's head, the tail will wag." And I would like to hear how you would refute that theory. Thank you.
Yeah, I think the tail will not wag. In any event, I think that's what he meant. In any event, as I said, there are a lot of people who didn't like the president, organized crime and big bankers and a whole lot of people. But it's not a question of motive. It's a question of evidence showing that they did something. In the case of the CIA, we have the evidence. Oswald's role, and we don't have that for organized crime, although it is true on occasion it was hard to tell where the CIA stopped and organized crime began. But all of the activities where organized crime and the CIA worked together, attempts to kill Castro, etc., were all CIA plans. Organized crime members were given an assignment of some kind. Oswald's role, very simply, was that of a patsy. And let me answer the question which was asked before, and I didn't answer it. What was Warren talking about in terms of nuclear war? Well, that's a very good question. Warren was briefed by the CIA. We have the documents. And he was told, as was Lyndon Johnson, and they were told that Oswald was in Mexico City from September 26th to October 4th, 1963, while in Mexico City. Now, these stories are true, that they were told to Warren and President Johnson, but they were fantasies created by the CIA. The CIA said Oswald was in the Soviet embassy in Mexico City. He called them. He said, "This is Lee Harvey Oswald. Are there any messages for me? I want to meet with Comrade Kostin, codenamed Kostikov." Kostikov was the man, the KGB agent in charge of assassinations for the Western Hemisphere. Then Oswald went to the Cuban embassy in Mexico City, according to the CIA, met with Sylvia Duran, and there was arranging for an exit visa to Cuba and then on to Moscow after he killed the president. Warren said, if this ever came out, we're talking about nuclear war. I don't know what is more pathetic, Warren's belief that the American people could not be trusted with the truth, or his reliance upon the CIA for the truth. The FBI agents who knew Oswald, who talked with him for 12 hours after he was arrested, listened to the CIA tape of the man saying, "This is Lee Harvey Oswald," and according to the memorandum signed by Hoover, they all said it was not Oswald's voice, clearly. Pictures of the man going in and coming out of the Soviet embassy, supposedly Oswald, it was not Oswald. Right. The whole story about Oswald and the Cuban embassy was fraudulent, as we see the cable traffic from the director of the CIA to the Mexico City police, ordering them to pick up the Sylvia Duran, hold her incommunicado in prison until she signed a false affidavit. Warren was captured by that lie.
Mark Lane's our guest. The book is Plausible Denial. Back after these messages. Author of Rush to Judgment, Mark Lane, now gives us Plausible Denial. Was the CIA involved in the assassination of JFK? If you want to order the book direct, charge it any major credit card. It will be signed by Mark. 1-800-831-8900. 1-800-831-8900. Back to the calls. Orford, New Hampshire. Hello.
Hello, Mr. Lane. I guess you've already didn't have an answer for the question of Bobby Kennedy's assassination, but it's interesting that.
I don't know. I haven't studied.
And his assassination, I guess. On the other hand, I guess that President Robert Kennedy is certainly more different from President Nixon than Johnson proved to be from Kennedy. And I was wondering how the people who you claim conspired to kill Jack Kennedy felt about the direction that Johnson took after he took over, which in many ways he actually did a number of things that were surprising in light of his earlier career. And I guess the second question is the people in the CIA who are worried about having the CIA abolished, why did they go to the extreme of killing the president? You could just say that the lower level people would just move over to the new agency, and the higher level people would have gone on to, some other field, such as, for example, George Bush did when he left the CIA.
Well, I don't know anything about the Robert Kennedy assassination, so I haven't studied it. In terms of LBJ taking over the program of JFK, it's just entirely untrue. As I said, John Kennedy was ready for rapprochement with Fidel Castro. We have all the documents published in Plausible Denial. He had sent a message to Fidel Castro saying, you can pursue socialism in the Western Hemisphere. Forget about the Monroe Doctrine. I take responsibility for the exploitation. These are his words. I take responsibility for the exploitation of the Cuban people under Batista. We offer our hand to you in friendship and support. And that was the message which was sent to Fidel Castro. What Lyndon Johnson did was to continue the CIA program of boycott and exploitation of the Cuban people, which is going on at the present time under George Bush. When it comes to continuing the policies of Vietnam, less than 100 Americans had died in Vietnam when John Kennedy was assassinated in Dealey Plaza. Less than 100. My wife and I walked down to that wall in Washington, D.C. It's not too far from our house. There are 58,000 names of young American kids who died there after John Kennedy was assassinated. That was a very different program from the one John Kennedy was talking about, withdrawing everyone from Vietnam before there were any more deaths. In terms of the CIA, John Kennedy was going to abolish it. Instead of that, the former director of the CIA is now president of the United States. Those are not the same policies.
Cross Village, Michigan, for Mark Lane. Hello.
Hello, Larry. Mr. Lane, am I not correct that E. Howard Hunt worked for Richard Nixon when he was in Congress? Do you tie Nixon into this at all? Where was Nixon on the 22nd? And while we're at it, where was Bush on the 22nd?
Where was who?
George Bush.
George Bush, I have a letter from him. He and I are in a book where they asked celebrities where they were and what they thought of on November 22nd. And the statement from Bush is that he was in East Texas addressing a Kiwanis club. Nixon had been in Dallas earlier in the day, but I don't think any of those things are significant. I see no evidence tying Nixon or Bush to the assassination. Besides, they weren't shooters. I mean, they could have been involved in planning a year before without being in Dallas, but I'm not suggesting that they were. I don't know about Hunt working for Richard Nixon in Congress, but I have a memo signed by a staff assistant to the FBI on the 24th day of November 1947 about the release for Jack Ruby to testify before the House Un-American Activities Committee, and the statement says, it is my sworn statement that the Jack Rubenstein of Chicago, noted as a potential witness for hearings of the House Committee on Un-American Activities, is performing information function for the staff of Congressman Richard M. Nixon, Republican of California. It is requested Rubenstein not be called for open testimony in the aforementioned hearings, and then ends up saying this is sensitive. So apparently Jack Ruby was working for Richard Nixon, and I didn't know about that until very, very recently when we got this document. I don't think it means anything, but I don't know anything about what it means.
New York City, hello. New York City, hello.
Hello, Mr. Lane, sir.
Hello.
Yes, sir. I don't think that you allowed the people who are listening to Larry King's show to understand that you were the attorney for Jim Jones there in Guyana. Have you made that known, sir?
Well, I wasn't, so I couldn't make it known. Charles Gary of San Francisco was the attorney for Jim Jones. I was asked by the people in People's Temple to go down there and deliver a lecture on the assassination of Martin Luther King, which is, in fact, what I did do.
By the way, caller, what would it matter since everyone's entitled to a lawyer?
You know, the so-called defense attorney, William Kunstler, is slowly but surely setting himself up for an assassin's bullet, sir. Mr. Lane, are you still with me, sir?
I don't know what you're talking about.
What are you talking about?
Have you ever considered yourself a target from either the political left or the right, sir?
I've received a lot of death threats. I take it this is not one more.
I hope
but
so.
I ignore them, and I pretty much ignore what you're saying now.
Mark Lane's book is Plausible Denial, a book you can order at 1-800-831-8900. It'll be signed by Mark. Back with our remaining moments after these messages. Silver Spring, Maryland, from Mark Lane. Hello.
Hello. How are you tonight?
Fine. How are you?
I'm very well. Question for you. I believe that there are many instances in history, especially 20th century history, that we'll never know the whole truth about. The Rosenbergs and things like that, the Zimmerman telegram. We will never know whether they're true, false, or anything else. I wonder as to the motives of everyone that keeps bringing up the John Kennedy assassination, and whether or not they're motivated by bringing someone to justice who has not been yet held accountable, or whether it's just to keep selling books.
What's the motivation, Mark?
I'll tell you my motivation. I was one of John Kennedy's campaign managers in 1960 here in New York City. In my district, I ran for the state legislature, and I was elected that year. We walked up and down 5, 6 flights of stairs. We had telephone banks. We gave out literature. We had sound trucks out there. We were engaging in the experiment that we engage in. This was a microcosm of what takes place all around this country. We're engaging in the great experiment of democracy when we elected a president. Millions and millions of people participated. It's hard to believe that after that, a few people in one agency can blow the brains out of the man you elected and veto everything that has taken place, and no one will do anything about it. I question the motives of those who say that's not such an important event that we have to get to the bottom of it. I'm not a prosecutor. I've been a defense lawyer my whole life. I wouldn't even prosecute those who were found, but I think there should be a special prosecutor appointed. Just as when Dreyfus was on Devil's Island, and every one of the French government and the French military knew he was innocent. It was said in France that the soul of France will not be redeemed until the truth is told about the Dreyfus affair. That's true about America as well. We've been lied to by our government. The vast majority of the American people, according to every single poll taken in the last quarter of a century, shows that the vast majority of the American people say, we know about that tragic day, that historic day when the president was killed, when we know the government has lied to us. We cannot allow that matter to remain unresolved. We're entitled to an answer from the President of the United States. Today, we can start to look at the files of the KGB. I think good Americans have to ask themselves, when will we be able to look at the files of the CIA?
New York City, hello.
Yes, those who would have us believe that Oswald acted as the sole assassin really amaze me. All the evidence from his years in the Marines clearly shows he was an inadequate shot. Just before the assassination, when he was in the Soviet Union, he joined a hunting club, and all the members stated unequivocally that he was an inadequate shot. How could he possibly shoot the president in the neck and then 2.3 seconds later hit him in the head?
I thought he was a marksman.
No, he was
not.
No?
He was not, no. In fact, I have the testimony of Nelson Delgado, who was with him in the Marine Corps, and he said he was on the firing line with Oswald, and when Oswald fired, there were an awful lot of Maggie's draws. Those of you who are not in World War II, or maybe they still do it since, when you fire at this gigantic target, if you miss the entire target, they wave a red flag, and as Delgado said, you don't see that very often, not on a Marine Corps firing line, but you saw it all the time when Oswald was fired.
Fort Worth, Texas, last call from Mark Lane. Hello.
John Kennedy at Columbia University 10 days before his assassination said the high office of president has been used to foment a plot to destroy Americans' freedom. And before I leave office, I must inform the citizens of this plight. He also issued U.S. notes, and that's being reported in Born Again Republic by M.J. Red Beckman. And when don't you think Bush had stepped down from all this nonsense? The spotlight's being reported. He took the kickbacks with Hussein and his trip to Paris.
We're all over the board here. Mark, you think we'll ever know the whole truth?
There's only one way to find out, I think, Larry, and that is if the people of this country say it's serious, it's important to us, and we insist that there be a special prosecutor. A special prosecutor can break this case in no time. I'm confident of that. Someone like Judge Walsh could do to this case what he did to the Iran-Contra case. He broke it. He made evidence available to the American people. A lot of people were indicted, and a lot of people were convicted because the process of government was not used to hide the facts, but to find the facts. That's what's required here.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you, Larry.
Always great having you with us. Mark Lane, author, lawyer, filmmaker. He wrote, of course, Rush to Judgment. He was one of the campaign managers for JFK in New York City in 1960. And his new book is Plausible Denial. Was the CIA involved in the assassination of JFK? It's published by Thunder's Mouth Press, and if you want to order the book directly, you can at 1-800-831-8900. That's 1-800-831-8900. It'll be charged to any major credit card. 1-800-831-8900. Our guests tonight have been Max Kampelman and Mark Lane. Both these hours will be repeated 1 hour from now on most stations. Monday night when we come back, Mark North will be with us, and his theory deals with the death of JFK and the involvement of J. Edgar Hoover. That is Monday night. Tomorrow night...